Welcome everyone to the event. I'm delighted to be hosting this panel at the Greenwich Economic Forum today on a very relevant topic of how different sectors have fared during 2020. 2020 has been a very tough year for the world economy, but some sectors and some industries have fared better than others. While staying at home bruised our retail and tourism sectors, home working has seen technology stocks rise to unprecedented highs. In this session, we hear from business leaders and investors about a variety of industries and what the future holds as we emerge to the new normal. I'm delighted to introduce you to my panelists. I've got with me Orlando Bravo, who is the founder and managing partner of Thoma Bravo. Robin Hayes, the chief executive of JetBlue, as well as Kipp de Veer, the chief executive officer of Ares Capital Corporation. So without further ado, I think we are going to launch into our discussion. I think I might start with Robin, because the poor airline industry has been particularly hard hit by the pandemic. So it has arguably been one of the most impacted by COVID-19. How have you navigated the last 7 months?
Thanks for the question, and great to be with you. And as you were talking about the airline industry, the sun just started shining through onto my face. So maybe there's a sign there that things are about to get better. But look, I mean, this thing hit us like a ton of bricks. Actually, before this, the industry was doing extremely well, particularly in the US. And I say thank goodness for that, because I think one of the reasons the industry here has been able to weather the storm relatively well is that we came into it in a pretty good shape, which was very different to pre-9/11 when the industry was clinging to its fingertips. So look, what have we done? I mean, the obvious things. We focused on making sure our people felt safe coming to work, that customers felt safe flying us. So you've seen airlines do a lot of work on health and safety and reassuring people. Everyone used to think air on the airplanes was really bad. I think everyone now knows actually the air on the airplanes is pretty good. But also protecting our financial security to make sure that we were raising money early. We protected our balance sheet to make sure that we could withstand this, and also focus on cash burn to reduce our cash burn as much as we could. And we moved quickly, and we're 7 months in, and there's no end in sight.
That's the problem, right? I mean, I live in Berlin at the moment, and they just built a brand new airport here after many delays, as you know.
Yes.
And I think everybody is wondering when is that brand new airport actually going to be used. Kipp, I'd like to come to you. Contrary to flights to the airline industry, with people not really flying anymore, the credit business has never been more in demand, or hardly ever been more in demand. What trends have accelerated in 2020, and what is your outlook for some sectors that have fared badly or well in the past year?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for the question. I think that's right. I think that in the businesses that we manage in credit at Ares, where we've got about 130 billion of assets under management in the public and private credit markets, trends that we've seen from investors really has been as a result of low interest rates and volatility in public markets, just an increased acceptance of private transactions. So we're just seeing inflows into everything that we manage in terms of a liquid credit, whether they're corporate credit strategies, asset-focused strategies, real estate debt, infrastructure, and of course with COVID, there's a particular excitement, perversely, and enthusiasm around, our distressed and special situation strategies. I think your follow-on question, since we're talking about industries, is a notion as we see it that there's just a real bifurcation as we look at both our existing portfolios and our new deal opportunities between industries, to Robin's point, that are COVID impacted and those that aren't. And it's interesting. We have, just to try to relay it to some of my co-panelists here, we have a few situations that are in and around the airlines, which obviously we have circled as, deeply COVID impacted names that, is going to take a while to dig back out of. On the other side, we have about 15% of our credit portfolios invested in the kind of businesses that Orlando's firm owns in software and services, most of whom have been, extremely resilient or not impacted at all, right? So we do take a broad look at the markets, and in terms of credit, tend to avoid industries where we see cyclicality, where we see increased incidence of default. But about 80% of our portfolios today are, not impacted by COVID at all and are performing extremely well. Unfortunately, the ones that are a little bit more impacted have challenges, and we're working to get those companies through. I know the panel is about industry, and then I'll quit speaking here. But the names, the industries where we see the impact are, of course, anything that's required physical attendance, right? So it's airlines, it's hospitality, it's retail, it's restaurants. But most of the other industries that we invest in, things like healthcare and technology and business services, have been actually surprisingly resilient.
Right. Thank you for that interesting response. Possibly even more than credit, Kipp, De Veer's industry, technology, all sorts of technology has been in high demand. When did Thomas Bravo decide to focus basically exclusively on technology and software investing?
We were lucky to do that about 20 years ago. Kipp and I went to business school together at Stanford. And Kipp, you'd really be happy about this. My team was saying, oh, he's going to be on the line. You know him, right? And I said, yes, look at my contacts. And I always write something about someone in the notes. And I remember when we were starting in software, you were coming to visit us. And my note was, GSB classmate, show him deals directly. And 20 years later, I think we've done a lot together, and that has been increasing over time, which is really nice.
We sure have.
But look, so 20 years ago, what happened was when the dot-com bubble burst, we were looking for opportunities as a private equity firm, as a small private equity firm, and we were very value-oriented. So we had a theme that was as follows. At the time, you could buy software recurring revenue streams less expensively than almost any other recurring revenue stream we had analyzed, whether it was cable, media, outdoor advertising, information services, you name it. And that kind of led us to the space. Then what happened was when we would really start looking at these companies, we were getting the opinion on the one side from our venture community that said, oh, those are old companies. They're going to go out of business. You're crazy to do that. And then we were getting feedback from the buyout firms that was saying technology is too risky. You shouldn't really underwrite that. But that didn't make sense to us when you really got to the bottom of these 90% gross margin, recurring revenue, thousands of customers, to the point where we would say things like, if you can buy the software company that runs a distribution business, why would you buy the distributor with 3% margin? Buy the 90% margin, 5,000 customer, all recurring business and participate in that sector that way. And then, it was really, then we started doing one deal at a time, and those were the better deals. So we decided to focus exclusively on it based on performance.
And that happened 20 years ago, or that was sort of a progressive development?
Exactly. That was progressive. That was progressive. And then we got to 2007, 2008, and that's when we looked at the performance historically of the software deals, the other deals, and any other industry. And we said, let's just do where we're doing best, which was in software. And of course, since then, we could have never predicted how the space has really taken off and what it is now.
It's now really on an accelerator, but of course one would have hoped that it didn't take a pandemic for that to happen, that it would happen naturally. Going back to the pandemic, Robin, I'd love to know from you. You said we don't know when this will end for the airline industry. Do you think that only once we have a vaccine and a very large number of people are vaccinated that things will get back to normal for your industry?
Yeah, I think a vaccine will be a very big part of it, but everyone sitting here who's waiting for the vaccine to suddenly flick a switch on, I think is mistaken. I mean, I think that there's going to be a hybrid way out of this, which is going to be a combination of, vaccine is a big part of it, but also some concept of testing or health passport, particularly for international markets. What you're seeing at the moment is governments all around the world create a lot of uncertainty in people's travel plans. You're seeing lockdowns in Europe. I mean, it's been very difficult to fly between the US and large parts of Europe most of the year. And even if you get to a point where you're willing to travel, some of these facilitation issues get in your way. Am I going to be away when another lockdown is announced and I can't get back? Is the country going to change the requirements after I book my trip so that I can't get my money back? And so, what we've tried to do as a global industry through IATA, which is our trade association, and ICAO, which is the sort of UN group that represents all the governments around the world, is try to kind of, as best we can, create a common set of standards so that we can start working on this in a more consistent way around the world as we get into 2021. So, look, I think it's going to be a combination of, I think we'll be in the world of potentially digital health passports, where people can show either proof of a vaccination, that they've had a COVID test, and also as we get into next year, rapid antigen testing at a very low price point is going to be available in real time, which will allow us to test even people at the airport, so that ultimately people can get on an airplane and feel reasonably confident. Because people not only want to get on an airplane, but they want to get on an airplane and have a normal experience again. They want to have a normal service. They want to have something to eat and drink. They don't want to wear a mask for 8-9 hour flight. But, to exit out of that, we've got to put a lot of things in place to make sure people feel that that's a safe thing to do. So, look, a vaccine will be a huge enabler, but there's some other things that need to happen as well.
Yes, that's very interesting. On the sort of more optimistic note, because I suppose optimism is in short supply in your industry. I remember after 9/11, people said, the large public will never fly again. It's just too scary a prospect, that you will be flown into a skyscraper. And then I think it took about 2 or 3 years to get back to normal. So, hopefully there'll be something similar, but of course it's very, very interesting. Kipp, I'm coming back to your industry. What types of new opportunities has the credit group in your company been able to capitalize on in the last year?
Sure. I think in our existing businesses over the course of the last 8 months, things have changed a lot. The middle of March was a really disruptive time, for any investor, maybe other than Orlando, who was purely exposed to the software and services business and probably felt better than others. We spent the first 3 months of the pandemic really looking internally and assessing, where the problems were, what the damage was, et cetera. And that gave us some pretty interesting opportunities in the existing portfolio to do what I would call, rescue financings or runway extension type of transactions to provide liquidity to companies that needed it immediately. We often did it with equity owners. But things have changed a bit. There's a healthier new investment environment, probably since the middle of July in most industries where we've seen new deal flow. But it's pretty broad. I mean, our platform, again, has, a stressed and opportunistic business that coincides with our lending business, that coincides with our alternative credit business. So we've done everything from a pipe into an outdoor advertising business that wanted to build liquidity, a public company that said, I'm not sure exactly the shape of the return to normal for us. We did a deleveraging transaction for a public, mortgage business that had a mark-to-market facility with banks that probably was not healthy for them over a longer haul. So, we've been playing, I'd say, our existing portfolio of healthy names, doing more traditional add-ons, and then doing more opportunistic and kind of rescue type situations in the existing portfolio, as well as some new portfolio names too. It's been very diverse.
Right. Fascinating. Orlando, I'm coming to you with another question about technology. When people think about technology, they usually think Facebook and Apple and Google, but of course there's a much larger tech sector beyond those companies, particularly when it comes to software. So how has software performed during the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I do want to say that it's not all rosy in software. You have to work with your customer. So we at Thoma Bravo really take the perspective that the more you work with your customer over time and be flexible within business reason, the much further along you will get in 4 to 5 years. So within that philosophy, for example, is how do you deal with adding value to the customer, and how much do you price in? And how much can you shock your customer when you're adding a lot of value by putting up pretty large price increases, which can be justified at the time, but doesn't allow you to really grow with your customer like you could over the years. So in March and April, when we did not know what was going to happen to new bookings, to retention rates, to customers' liquidity, depending on the vertical that they were in, because software has become the business. So you're moving with your customer through it. We were really working with a number of customers on late payments, deferred payments. How could we be helpful over the long term? Because that builds a much more important and meaningful relationship with them. Now, this market overall, software, business to business software, which does not include those very large consumer tech names that are in the middle of data and a number of big issues in the world right now. But that $6 trillion business to business software market has done overall very well for a couple of reasons. Number one is, since it has become the business, customers cannot really operate without those workflows, without that automation, without that cybersecurity, without running their IT departments in a new way, in an automated fashion. So those recurring revenues from customers remained really stable. We had always been saying that, going back to that original 2000 thesis that we had. We lived through it later in the global financial crisis, and the recurring revenue was very good, and the customer relationship was very good with these companies. There were hedge fund blogs and commentaries that this time it was going to be different. And we didn't think so. It just doesn't make sense, except for customers that are so affected that they cannot continue in business. So that part was proven yet again, creating a rise in valuations in the market. And then the second part, which we are too conservative to maybe have predicted at the time, was the move towards digital and the move towards the cloud and the move towards automation accelerated. And companies, especially in North America, were very forward-looking and willing to invest throughout these very difficult times strategically in those products. So the sales pickup really was remarkable for many of these companies. The other thing that happened was new companies typically solve new problems. So there were a number of companies in software that were very well positioned to deal with some of the problems we're facing now. You know, we have a company called Instructure that does online education. That was a big value added to the world, really. We have another company that provides security software into hospitals so that doctors and healthcare workers don't have to continuously log in. that was that improved productivity, especially during the time when hospitals were overrun and healthcare workers were moving from one organization to the other. So that has also been, I'm saying many of these companies have provided solutions that are needed now as well.
Very interesting. Yeah, speaking of software companies, I'm sure you might have followed the recent fate of SAP, a big German software maker, and they are having a tough time. So I can see it's not a straightforward ride for many of them. So thank you for that interesting response. Now I'm going back to the airline industry, Robin. What role do you think technology could play in a return to normalcy?
Well, I talked a little bit about the health passport, and I do think that if we think about the whole travel sector, we all have the same challenges. Where you're an airline, you're a hotel, you're a theme park, you're bringing people together in a fairly restricted area, and they're going to have safety concerns. I think what you don't want to do as a customer, though, is do a rapid antigen test when you get on your flight, do another one when you arrive at your hotel, do another one when you go to the theme park. So I do think that there is a role here, and we're seeing a number of companies do this, sort of inserting themselves between the testing space and the sort of customer, so that if I'm a customer, I can go to my pharmacy, I get a test. It's obviously valid for a period of time. It uploads onto my app, and I can use that to, access different airlines and different products in the travel sector. I personally think that's how sports arenas are going to get open too, because I think to get people back into, I hope it's not to 2022 before I can go to a Premier League game. So I think that we're going to see technology, I think, moving very quickly to help solve these what I call facilitation issues. And then just more broadly than that, I mean, we were never cleaning airplanes with UV robots before, we are now. And then just, using technology to drive more and more customers to book directly through our own mobile infrastructure. When you've got flights disrupted, cancellations, it is much easier when you're dealing with people that book with you directly. You know who they are, you know how to get hold of them, and you can get help to them much more quickly. So, I think those are some of the examples. But, I was thinking back in February, I wasn't spending any time in meetings thinking about apps that could get people back on airplanes by proving that they've got a vaccine or a recent test. I'm spending a lot of time doing that now.
Yes, yeah, I can imagine. Your work there must have changed a lot in recent months. Kipp, coming back to you, how does the economic outlook differ for companies of different sizes that you work with, given that your client base ranges from mid-sized companies to some of the largest in the world?
Sure. Yeah, I thought this was an interesting question as we were kind of preparing for the panel. I mean, Ares is squarely a middle market, investment firm across all of our businesses, but that definition varies, I think, for a lot of different middle market investors. Typically, the companies that we invest in on the debt and the equity side tend to have somewhere between 25 million of EBITDA and 250 million of EBITDA. And I would tell you, for two reasons, the simple answer to your question is the larger companies are performing better. I think part of that is the public policy response to COVID, which is that a lot of the stimulus really benefits large companies in a way that it doesn't, accrue to the smaller mid-market companies, right? That's capital markets access. That's the way certain government programs are delivered. I think generally the larger companies are favored there. But I'll say away from COVID, we strongly believe that, the upper end of the middle market, particularly as lenders, just offers better value, right? 150 million EBITDA company tends to be better positioned and better managed than a $25 million company, $25 million EBITDA company for a whole host of reasons, right? Stronger management team, probably better positioned in its industry. To Orlando's earlier points, more diverse revenue stream, more diverse customer base, et cetera, et cetera. But all of the stats underlying our portfolio today, as well as public, index knowledge, would tell you that it's the smaller companies in this pandemic that are suffering more than the larger companies. It's very clear to us, both in our portfolio and in others.
Yes, the same is actually happening here in Germany, but it's now become a political issue in the sense that many of the smaller companies and people who work independently feel that the public policy is really favoring the big firms, and they're helping Lufthansa a lot, the national airlines and the big car makers, car making being such an important industry in Germany. So my follow-up question to you, Kipp, is is that something that's very much of the public debate too? Is there a lot of grumbling amongst the smaller and mid-sized companies that they feel they're not being helped as much as the big guys?
I think there's a reasonable amount of grumbling. I mean, I think some public programs, maybe PPP in particular, were meant to focus on smaller companies and, those that particularly weren't private equity backed, in our world that was helpful. I'm not sure if it's enough grumbling to change things. I do think government policy response early days, to your point about Lufthansa, was we need to protect some of our larger companies and larger industries, in terms of national interest and how government interplay with business typically works. But I think increasingly what we're understanding, at least here in the States, about this health crisis is it is, kind of accruing itself most negatively on small real estate owners and small businesses. So I think it's incumbent upon the government to continue to try to figure out how to ease that tension, because I do think it exists. And I do think it will potentially accelerate as this goes on longer and longer, which unfortunately I think it may.
Small real estate owners, you mean owners of houses and little shops, or what kind of real estate is particularly challenged?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the smaller commercial landlord right now, as we see in our property businesses, is challenged much more so than, a large REIT or a, multinational development company, et cetera. So if you own, 8 apartment buildings or, 8 commercial properties, pick a location near me in, Queens, New York, you're obviously in a very different position than if you're a large, integrated real estate development firm or REIT that has better access to financing, much more diversity in their portfolio, much more diversity in their rent streams. Unfortunately, that tends to have real socioeconomic consequences as well, in terms of who's losing income, who's having a more difficult time getting their kids to school, or unfortunately feeding their families. And, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I do think there are real political consequences of that as this health crisis extends.
Yes, sure. Many people are having a terribly tough time. Orlando, coming to you, we are staying with the software industry. We like that industry. What trends do you see in software today that makes the sector so ripe for an investment?
Yeah, something that the industry doesn't talk enough about is how the size of the industry has been multiplied relatively recently. And there are 2 reasons for that. About 5-7 years ago, when the industry went to a rental model, subscription model, and delivery through the cloud, the industry really was, or became, the potential market size became roughly 10x what it was before. So for example, right, if we work with Robin and a number of our companies provide services to your company, and in the prior world, when they sold software as a product, we would be capped to the capital expenditure budgets of our customers. You have a budget, it's a CapEx, and you need to fit within that. Now, if we approach a company like Robin's with a rental solution where one of his operators can create value, a 6-month payback, a 9-month payback, where we either take cost out of the P&L or improve the revenue in a way that can be measured, there's infinite budget for that. That's a productivity gain. So the change in business model created a really a market that is much more rapidly growing market and larger potential total available market. But then the second reason, and Robin, you spoke about this in terms of where you're spending time, as well on apps, et cetera, is the software industry for most of its time was focused on solving the direct cost of procurement, the direct cost of goods sold. Now, that is a very small percentage of a company's activities today and of a company's cost. Now, most software solutions enabled by this new SaaS model, enabled by cloud computing, are focusing on the problem of labor, of how to make labor a lot more productive. And that is where most of the cost of a company is and where most of the opportunity is, right? Because humans can get so creative that you could always do a lot more. You have these incredible resources that you're trying to retain. So even when you get existing software companies, as they're starting to shift from the direct cost of goods sold, direct cost of procurement, to really labor type workflows and solutions, it becomes a just much more interesting market, and it gets you a lot more embedded in your customer, and therefore software becomes the business, not an industry sector, but a business model within a certain industry.
That's really fascinating. May I ask you a follow-up question? Can you talk a little bit about the digital transformation, which was, I suppose, already underway, but it has been accelerated by COVID-19? And could you give some examples of how this is playing out for software?
Well, that's what was already in place, that received a step function increase because executives and companies saw that they did not want to operate in-house software, data centers, lots of IT personnel. It was very difficult to get to data centers. It was very difficult to manage this, especially when that's not the core business. So they're moved towards the cloud, and they're moved to outsourcing, in essence, their workflows, their software solutions, their cybersecurity needs, their infrastructure software needs was really, really accelerated. And then the world has become, and executives have become, very creative in terms of automation. So because of those two primary reasons, the move towards automation and software has really accelerated.
Thank you so much. I'm coming back to you, Robin. JetBlue is actually more than an airline. You also have a travel and a venture capital subsidiary. How have those areas been affected by the pandemic?
Yeah, it's funny. I feel we're talking about software, high margins, and then you sort of go down to airlines. It's like going down a slide in a theme park. So back at the airlines. So we created JetBlue Tech Ventures a number of years ago, and actually the genesis of that was people coming to me with all these like innovative ideas from outside, and I would throw them into the organization, and nothing would ever happen with them. And yet, we were viewed as an innovative company. And I think that, everyone was so task saturated. They were so busy doing what they were doing. And it just spent a lot of time even figuring out, if you like the idea, is the first person pitching it to you the best person to work with on that idea? So what we did is we kind of created Tech Ventures. We put it in the Valley. And its mission, first and foremost, was to make investments in technology at the intersection of travel and technology, and then use that to help us kind of be more effective as an airline. So, our first investment actually was a company called Flyer, which was using AI, machine learning, to change the way airlines price tickets and sell inventory. And, we've got a few dozen investments now. And yes, look, there are, in some cases you make some money out of it, in some cases you don't. It wasn't really so much on the venture capital side, it was more to help us as a company sort of be more innovative, bring and take problems and solve them in a different way. So one of the things that we do now is we have these sprints where we'll take a problem we're trying to face in JetBlue, the team will go out, and we are still traveling will go out to the Valley and sit with our tech ventures team, and they will bring in a number of startups and companies that they think can help. And out of that has come several incredible ideas over the course of time.
It's fascinating. Kipp, I'm coming back to you. How do you see, I mean, obviously different companies, we've talked about credit, but also different industries have been affected. And we are talking about the leaders and laggards. They're the obvious candidates of the industries that have been hardest hit. So the travel industry, the whole hospitality sectors. But which other ones do you see that are struggling particularly hard at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, we invest in a whole host of different businesses, but the way that I really think about the laggards, again, are attendance-oriented businesses, right? So one of the things that we're actually spending a lot more time on than we have historically in our credit business are businesses oriented around sports, around live events, and around the media rights associated with those, for instance, right? There are other adjacencies to that, whether it's vendors, whether it's operators in airports, where Robin, we've got a very large investment in a food and beverage company called OTG that you're probably familiar with, right?
Quite familiar with it.
Yep, which is a fabulous company, but has, some real headwinds right now, as does JetBlue. So for me, it's really any business that requires attendance, because I think it's going to be a long time before there are, to your point about EPL, regular attendance at Premier League games or at, my favorite Yankee games out here in New York, or live concerts. And that has, real implications for companies that you might not think of, right? You think of the catering businesses, you think of the staffing businesses, certainly around, the airlines. We have another investment that's affiliated with, Delta that really bought and owns their ground safety and flight operations business on behalf of Delta and for other airlines. So, again, it is a small group, unfortunately, of pretty impacted companies here. And I think Robin can tell you a lot better than I can. It's very difficult to forecast when demand will return to these industries and at what levels. And for a lot of these businesses that are very utilization reliant, as are airlines, the profit margins don't come back, necessarily in line with the revenues, right? And unfortunately, over the years, a lot of these companies have a lot of debt on them too. So I think what I'm saying is, we feel, as I'm sure JetBlue feels too about their business, that pre-pandemic, we have a handful of franchise companies that should and will operate most likely at the profit levels that they did prior to this outbreak. But my crystal ball is exceedingly cloudy these days around, when that's going to happen and how long the recovery may be for the demand to go to sporting events and get on airplanes and go to concerts and buy everything that comes with it. So I think that's where we're being cautious. The key for us is the businesses that we're invested in those sectors, we as lenders, and to the extent we end up as equity investors too, need to be good supporters of those businesses, right? I mean, Orlando made the point about supporting your customers before. Our lending businesses really only work if we support equity owners and we support management teams. What's happened here is not any of these companies' faults, right? But they are being forced to react to an unbelievably difficult environment. So it's our goal to try to be a force of good in these situations that are going to require time. And we've got capital, we've got liquidity to help support those situations. But how do I see it recovering? I can't see that. You can't say that I've got a lot of certainty as to how long this is going to take, or how much working capital we're all going to have to put in to support that recovery.
Sure, there's so much anxiety and uncertainty around, which makes it so hard. Orlando, I'd like to come back to you one more time and ask you how the work from home environment has underscored the importance of software.
Oh, well, look at us now, it's all now productivity tools that we all use. The software industry and the finance industry, we haven't lost a beat in terms of our productivity based on all the software tools out there. It's not as fun. It's as productive, but certainly not as fun as being together with your social group of colleagues, for sure. So that's where we are. And I did want to say, Robin, when you please, when you come to Silicon Valley or have your team come, let us know. I'd like to see if we can add some value to those software discussions, and we would really, really love that.
Yeah.
And yeah, there could be a lot of things that we can do together, which would be hopefully additive to your mission.
Yeah, that's exciting. Thank you. I'll take you up on that.
And by the way, yeah, I know the margins are a bit lower in your space, but the revenue multiples are not like 30 times. You at least work in a world with real price to earnings ratios, so that's okay.
I feel better.
We have about 3 minutes left, so I basically want each of you to have sort of a final word, and maybe touch upon something that you feel we should have mentioned and didn't, given that we only had 45 minutes. Maybe Robin, we can start with you.
No, look, I think it's important to be optimistic. I mean, what we're going through as a country, as a global community, is just something that we've never really been through, probably on this scale since the Second World War. I mean, it really is a transformative event. And so, I worry a lot about people. I worry a lot about communities. I worry a lot about, not just people's health, but people's mental health too. But we will get through this. I mean, like, as human beings, we have this amazing curiosity. We have this amazing desire to see the world and socialize with people. And so I'm confident that once we get through the public health crisis, once we kind of claw out of the economic crisis, which, as we've heard today, is definitely impacting some sectors much more than others, I'm confident the future will be bright, even for airlines again, and things will open up again. And I think it's about focusing on that point. And I actually think technology can play a huge part of helping us out of this as well. So, I look forward. There's always a connections on every panel. And I think that's the connection on this panel too.
Well, I'm glad we could help create a connection. Kipp, what's your sort of final take?
Yeah. I think I was just on my soapbox there for a little bit, so I won't stay on it for much longer. But I mean, look, I think Robin's making the key point. This has been a really challenging time for a lot of people. And I think, fortunately, most of the folks here on this panel, and I think Orlando's exactly right. I've repeated this around our organization all the time. My job's not as fun, but outside of going a little bit nuts, being stuck in my house all the time and not enjoying my job or my personal life as much, I don't have a lot to complain about. And I think we need to remember that lots of the folks that work in our companies and also live in our communities may not be in exactly that position. So as a firm, we're focusing so much on our people and how they're feeling and how they're doing. But I think we're also dedicating this as a way to kind of look inward on our company and figure out how we can be better citizens in the communities that we're in, whether it's New York, whether it's California, London, the rest of Europe, Asia. And we're spending a lot of time on issues of social justice and racial equality and gender diversity and getting better at all of that at our firm. So I think it's humanized us a little bit, and I think we can make some really positive social change at all of our organizations while we do this, because it's exposing us to things that we had just haven't been exposed to in the past, or at least I haven't. So that's what I'd leave you with.
It makes you look inward a little bit, right? And rethink some. Some of the, yes, no, that's a good point. And Orlando, I'll give you the final word.
Well, I really like what Robin and Kipp said. And to me, it's stay positive. People follow people that are positive. And in the personal side, think about all the great things we have gotten to do with either our close family or children or what have you, and try to really focus on that. You have to do the best you can do with what you're given, with what you've been dealt with what you have. So I think that helps. I think integrating ourselves into the community and into social issues is so important. There's no better time than now. With the philosophy is, if you don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. And whatever really touches you at a personal level, you're ideally positioned for that. And then from a business perspective, given the theme of staying positive, is health is one thing. Health is complicated. But remember, all business problems can be solved. And we will come out of it with a lot better ways of working, better ways of interacting, better ways of communicating. So stay positive and focus on just solving business problems, because if you have a team that is really willing to do it, all these problems in business can be figured out.
Great. I love ending on a hopeful note of stay positive. So thank you so much, all of you, Robin, Kipp, and Orlando. It's been a pleasure to have you as panelists, and you've shown, all of you. Thank you. Have a good day, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.